Virginity and being the perfect church girl is not a magic potion formula for God to poof us out this perfect knight in shining armor.
I guess I really don't know what Christmas is all about. Isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about?
Chestnut roasting, Jack Frost nipping at your nose.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I am pumped to be doing a long-awaited new episode of Save Single Left Behind. I feel like it's been a minute. It has been, I think our last episode was episode 6, Grieving My Singleness, which was maybe September, October, somewhere around there. I think September. As most of you know, I've been doing 12 Days of Christmas, and if you've seen the title already, you already know kind of what I'm about to get at. You might be a little shocked, but when I thought of this title, I felt like it really captured what I wanted to talk about today. And it's essentially that God owes me nothing, and that is one of the many lessons that I should have learned while still single, but now I'm learning them being in my first ever relationship for the last 8 months. And I just figured I would be doing you all a disservice if I didn't share those things with you, so that you would have the opportunity to start working on them now and have these revelations way before I did. Honestly, I just really feel like it's a message that a lot of us, especially Christian women or Christian girls growing up in the church, need to hear. So if you've seen the Good Girl Syndrome episode, I think it was like episode 3 of this series, so much good feedback and conversation happened from that video. But I really talked in there about my journey with purity and virginity and the different messages that I received around sex growing up, being that I was raised in the church and in a church household. But I feel like the intention behind these messages are to try to help us to spare ourselves so that we don't end up, you know, in a lot of damaging relationships, or essentially being like reckless with sex as we grow and develop through puberty and the earlier stages of adulthood. But the message pretty much backfires for the most part. I mean, there's definitely some baggage attached to this method of teaching girls to essentially be asexual, that, you know, the more pure we are, the more virgin-like we are, the holier we are, the more godly we are, the deeper our relationship with Christ is. And that's just, it's a bunch of hoopla, right? Okay, but I think what I want to tackle today is this aspect of kind of how we perceive our own virginity and how easy it is for that to turn into pride. So let me explain. I think I might have said something like this in the video, but I did realize eventually that virginity kind of becomes like a badge of honor. So people really look up to you for it, and it's kind of this thing that the people around you, for whatever reason, that you can't lose and that you have to protect. And essentially your character becomes wrapped up in this identity of you as this innocent, you know, pure girl, right? Well, see, the problem with this is that, you know, as we glorify this Proverbs 31 woman, which, by the way, can we talk about how social media, there was a period of time where like every Christian girl had Proverbs 31 in their captions and in their bios. I mean, literally, it was like, I know I did at one point. I've at least had it on a caption. But it was like this thing that we were all like striving for and striving to be. And not to say that we shouldn't at all. Like, I would still very much say that I strive to be a Proverbs 31 woman. But the context around that became kind of like an elitist type thing. It was like church girls started to believe that like by us living this certain way that almost like God owed us something, and that this title put us above the rest. So with that, I can see how I adopted this mentality that because I was living a certain way, God owed me this knight in shining armor. And the first time I actually really had to challenge these thoughts was there was a Facebook status. It was a couple years ago. I could not find it on Facebook when I went to look to see if I could read it to you all, but it really like struck a nerve in me. Like, I remember being visibly upset when I read this, and it was essentially somebody saying like, you know, y'all are out here thinking that virginity or keeping yourself or whatever equals a perfect spouse and a perfect marriage, and that's not the case. Because with that context, it's almost as if to say people who do have sex before marriage or have children before marriage or whatever are setting up to have, you know, these horrible marriages. that's not the case. I know plenty of people who had sex before marriage, had children before marriage and all this stuff, and still had an amazing, fruitful, godly even marriage. So I feel like that whole message that we begin to believe that, okay, I'm doing this and God owes me, like God, you know, God is going to honor the way that I'm living my life and give me this knight in shining armor. And I just feel like that mindset is so faulty, y'all, because it's just, the two to me almost don't go together. Like, just because I decide to keep myself and all that does not mean that I'm going to have a perfect spouse. First of all, nobody's perfect. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is virginity and purity do not make you an amazing partner. And I know that's gonna shock some of y'all. It shocked me, honestly, thinking like there were some challenges that I was, you know, kind of struggling with in the early stages of our relationship. And I was just like really upset because I'm like, how is that I'm struggling with this stuff? You know, I waited so long for a relationship. Like, I should be killing this because I did all the right things. And it's like, that's the problem. Is like, those two things are not correlated. Just because you are able to maintain your virginity does not mean you're gonna be an amazing partner. It does not mean that you know how to be selfless and put somebody else's needs before yourself. Like, I feel like there's a gap there. And so we spent so much time in the church focusing on this aspect of sex and leaving everything else to the wind, which completely screws up the message for young girls, especially me. Like, I was one of them, really believing this idea that God had this knight in shining armor waiting just because I decided to live my life in a specific way. A couple that really helped me to put this in perspective is Belief Mel and Mrs. Melanin. I know I've talked about them here on the channel before, but I remember looking, you know, to these other black women and black Christian women who were able to, you know, in my eyes, have this knight in shining armor, this amazing marriage, beautiful kids, all this stuff. And in your mind, you kind of convince yourself that it is that they decide to live this perfect life and then they have this perfect marriage. But that's how we deceive ourselves, because all marriages take work, all relationships take work. And that's what I got from their journey. Like, hearing them talk on their podcast, How Married Are You, really changed my perspective and recognizing like, oh, they still had work to do. Like, oh, they still had to go through things to get the marriage that they wanted. Like, oh, it wasn't necessarily that she just got this knight in shining armor that popped up. Like, no. I really feel like this is a powerful message that we need to get now. I feel like church girls, we've been deceived by ourselves, by society, by our families, by our church, by whoever, but we've been deceived, and I want to get us out of that mindset as early as possible so that you can spend your time working on things that matter, such as figuring out what is my communication style. Like, while you're single, that's what you really want to figure out. Look at how you communicate with people you love in times of trial as well as in the positive times. Like, what are some areas that you need to work on? Write that stuff down, get it clear, get a visual on it so you can start working on it as early as possible. Think about your conflict resolution. Like, how do I act when there is conflict? Am I somebody who's quick to get over conflict, or does it take me a minute? And what does that mean? What soft skills do I need to be working on to make myself a better partner? Ask yourself if you're more selfless or if you're teetering towards selfish. I think a lot of us, while single, we are really embedded in that selfishness. Even if we're, you know, people with good hearts who serve and do all these other things, when it comes to personal relationships, it's very possible that we are leaning towards more of a selfish side because we've only had to rely on ourselves for so long. But again, that is not compatible with a partnership, with a relationship. If you're thinking about what are the messages that you've received and taken in about sex and sexuality, and whether you're in a space of owning your sexuality and who you are just as a woman, or if you're still shying away from that. Like, I would venture to say I was still shying away from myself as a woman, being able to own myself and who I am in all of my glory. And that does not equate promiscuity. That does not equate being fast. Like, no, owning your sexuality is important for all people to do. God created us specifically and intentionally, and no part of myself should I feel ashamed about. No part of my identity, no part about my womanhood should I feel shame attached to that, which I feel like, again, is so easy to do in singlehood. Like, y'all, I really was out here believing that I had this like relationship side of life down pat. Like, I thought it would be fine because I was following some certain rules, and it's like, no, your purity journey should be between you and God. It should be a decision based on how you want to carry yourself and and the things you do or don't want to deal with. God is not a genie. Virginity and being the perfect church girl is not a magic potion formula for God to poof us out this perfect knight in shining armor. I just feel like that is such a skewed way, and I don't think that was God's intention. Regardless of how pure and holy and whatever else we think we are, at the end of the day, one, the Bible says our righteousness is as filthy rags, so there's that. And number two, God doesn't owe us a thing at all. So make sure that that's not your heart posture around relationships and marriage. With all that said, I hope something I said today really challenged you, encouraged you, made you think. If it did, drop it down in the comment section so that we can have a good conversation about this, because I really feel like God dropped this in my spirit. I think he did it months ago, but I really had to work through it and really come to terms with how I was feeling about it, and really thinking about how, man, I really wish somebody would have been talking to me about this stuff from this perspective before I was ever in a relationship. But I do think he's using my relationship to, you know, kind of wake me up and just really start to work on some of these areas. If you're enjoying hanging out with me every day for 12 days of Christmas, let me know by giving me a big thumbs up. And officially it was 6 days until Christmas, less than a week. I really hope that y'all are more ready than I am. I'll catch y'all tomorrow for day 7. Bye.